Right, we're once again joined by clinical psychologist Roux to unpack the psychology behind what's at play in the Oscar Pistorius trial. Now, a big question, and I think a key aspect to the state's case, is the relationship between Pistorius and Steenkamp. And in the following never-before-seen clip, we get a glimpse of what Riva Steenkamp had to say about him shortly after their first date at the SA Sports Awards. Let's take a look.
I want to ask you a very tricky question. And you were at the South African Sports Awards with a specific Olympic medalist, Oscar Pistorius. Is anything happening there between you guys?
He is an amazing man, and watch this space. I don't know.
Thank you so much. You've enjoyed your evening.
Thank you so much.
Heartbreaking to see Riva on screen there, but you can see clearly she is smitten with him, even at that early stage, as you'd expect. You know, do we ever really know someone, you know, especially in a fresh relationship, and even at the point when the killing happened, they hadn't been together for a long time. What is your perception of how well she could have known him?
Well, when we fall in love, we actually just want to see the positive in the other one. We reflect the positives to each other. But I think that very early in relationships, we would spot small little incidences where a person will react with anger, and when that is out of proportion to what is actually happening, and that happens frequently, I think then we really need to take a note and know that this potentially underneath that could be a vast reservoir of anger that comes sometimes from childhood and a lot of other experiences that potentially can explode later on.
And before we get into Gerry Nell's sort of line of attack, you know, we mentioned earlier that the life that Oscar has lived, this has obviously given him a predisposition. It has had a psychological effect on him. Could that kind of violent behavior, the anger, the ego, be a result of the kind of life that he's led as a double amputee?
Most definitely, because what happens is because of the injury to his masculinity that we spoke about, he then is compensating to create a kind of an inflation against the part that is deflated in his ego. So there's an insecurity that he's trying to hide away by actually creating an alternative kind of reaction. So partly why he also probably became so successful, because he really had to practice very hard. So it's almost like his injury became his asset, but then at the same time now also his downfall.
Now, Riva once wrote that she feared him at times, and this has definitely come out now, certainly in messages between mobile phones and the like. Were there warning signs from your sort of understanding of those messages and what's been brought up in the case, early warning signs or things that should have set off a red flag?
During the trial, there was a lot of people witnessing or talking about potential situations where he reacted out of the ordinary in a violent way or an aggressive way. Those kind of things should be warning signs. And I think that, you know, that women and people in general should actually take note of these, and also that the people around Oscar should also take responsibility for actually not reacting to these kind of warning signs, because we could have had maybe a different outcome.
You know, the fact that everyone around Oscar would have been obviously giving him special allowance because of the kinds of achievements. He was doing things that no man has ever done before. How much of that would have been feeding into his psychology? The fact that he would have been allowed to get away with pretty much whatever he had wanted to throughout his life, because he's always working from a disadvantage, because he's achieving these amazing things.
Because he was achieving these amazing things, he actually could create that inflation and hold it. So it's almost like a fantasy that he created, and everybody was playing into that. But then he would also do everything in his power to actually stop anybody deflating that. So it will be according to his rules, and he would get very angry potentially if anybody goes against that.
Now, the world is quite literally crumbling around Oscar, and we've seen a shift even in his own behavior. How does anyone survive this? You know, I think people are wanting him to be defensive, or they're wanting to see him kind of stand up for himself, but now the onslaught really has begun. How do you see him standing up, and how does one survive this kind of onslaught?
Yeah, and it must be devastating to his psyche to actually withstand this. The real question is actually, is his emotional reaction because of his grief to what happened to Riva and her family, or is his grief towards what's happening to himself personally? We all have defenses, so the defenses makes us experience kind of environments very differently and make us stand up differently in these kind of situations.
Just very briefly, do you think it is fear or do you think it is remorse that he is displaying at the moment?
Well, I think there would definitely be both. And the remorse part, only Oscar will know what he's have remorse about.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Pleasure.
Incredibly insightful, and you can share your thoughts on our Facebook page. And we'll obviously bring you more in-depth details as we progress, and you can check out sabcnews.com for all of the very latest details. We're going to take a quick break.